From living the dream married to a city princess, raising two incredible kids, running a growing business, and settling down in the hometown I always imagined raising a family into falling straight into hell within just a few weeks, this is how it all unraveled. I lived, I guess you could say, in Milltown, a tiny dot in the Midwest with barely 1,000 people. The nearest actual town has a population of about 20,000, sitting 60 miles out, surrounded by even smaller clusters of nothingness along the way. We had the usual, a few convenience stores that tried to be mini, Walmart's groceries up front, but if you dug around long enough, you could find toys, clothes, office supplies, batteries, some random kitchen, gadgets, and even fabric and thread for the occasional wannabe seamstress, a tiny pharmacy, a local hardware store under the True Value brand, a dusty old farm supply place, more coffee shops than we really needed, one big local bank and a modest credit union. And then there was my business, my pride, my independence, a small IT consulting firm I'd built from the ground up. We sold hardware PCs, servers, monitors, the usual tech gear. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. What really made the business hum was bundling it all into full-service packages, building networks, setting up systems, maintaining infrastructure. My clients? The local bank, the regional hospital, the school district. Even though my biggest competition was in a much larger city, I still pulled in contracts from there. More than once, I was called in to fix systems my competition couldn't figure out themselves. Oh, right. I should probably introduce myself. Name's Alex Danvers. I'm 30. For those who like stats, I'm about 6 feet tall, weigh in at 180 pounds when dry. And up until very recently, I was married to Julia Lancaster, someone I'd known since middle school, though we ran in completely different circles growing up. Julia, or Jules as I used to call her, will soon be remarried now that our divorce is all but final. We were married for 7 years. I thought they were solid years, good ones, even. Turns out, that was just my version of the story. Her version? It ended with a bombshell. She walked in one day and told me she was leaving me. Just like that. No warning. No lead-up. Just a complete detonation of the life we'd built. Now, let me be clear. Julia and I weren't some high school love story. We weren't sweethearts. We barely spoke back then. Different social worlds, different energy altogether. We went to the same college, but even there, we didn't overlap much. She was the classic small-town royalty. Her dad, Edward Lancaster, owned the only real bank in town, Lancaster Savings and Loan. That bank held just about every loan in the county. Farmers, the feed store, the market, the mom-and-pop shop shell, even the gas station ran on Edward's money. Nearly everyone's car or mortgage loan came through that man. And nobody batted an eye. Folks liked shaking their banker's hand. Here made them feel secure. Online banking never really stood a chance. Even I had a small operating loan through Lancaster's bank. The irony wasn't lost on me. Anyway, back to Julia. It wasn't until after we both graduated that she suddenly took an interest in me. Out of nowhere, back in school, I was obsessed with her. Not stalker level, but definitely a quiet, wide-eyed admiration. She was gorgeous long blonde hair, athletic build, that perfect, I'm popular but I swear I'm down to earth cheerleader vibe. And she had the body to match. Let's not lie, her figure didn't exactly hurt her social standing. She dated the classic all-American quarterback type Mark Bishop. Guy was golden, star athlete, clean-cut, even charming in a nauseating way. Went off to play football on a full ride, and that's where their paths split. I didn't hang out with Julia's crowd, not even close. She was in the biggest sorority on campus, practically ran the place. Her boyfriend's fraternity was the male counterpart. They had mixers, galas, tailgates, you name it. Me, I was the guy in the library corner buried in code, a total nerd. My major required twice as much lab and study time as most others, and I still had to work nights to cover what my small scholarship didn't. My dad, who managed Harvey's Market, made just enough to keep me from qualifying for grants, but not enough to actually help with tuition. To put it into perspective, my parents' entire house could fit in one wing of the Lancaster estate, barely. Weekends with my dad meant hiking and fishing low cost, high-value bonding time. Julia's weekends? Aspen. The Ozarks? Maybe Miami. Occasionally, Hawaii. One time, just because, they went to Maine to see the leaves change. No joke. So yeah, we were cut from two very different fabrics, just happened to be stitched in the same zip code. Before I left, I made sure my old house, the place where I'd once imagined raising grandkids, was completely lit by the flames. The blaze danced against the windows, roof catching fast, wood popping in the heat. I walked calmly, quietly, 2 blocks through the shadows, to where I'd stashed the pickup truck. I parked down the street and waited. Just as expected, Rebecca drove straight into her parents' gated community. Yep, believe it or not, Milltown had a gated neighborhood guardhouse, fences, cameras, the whole 9 yards. All for a population of barely 1,000. She rolled past the gate and slammed on the brakes when she saw either childhood home engulfed in fire. Her mother stood outside, flailing, wringing her hands, crying out for someone to help. The flames were already well past saving. Guess who controlled the software and security system for that exclusive gated community? Yours truly. When the fire started, the on-site patrol had already been diverted by a fake burglary alarm I triggered on the opposite end of the development. No one was left to respond. And no one could access the internal systems I'd locked them out. According to what I later heard, Rebecca stayed there for a while, shaken and aimless. But with nowhere else to go and the motels mysteriously experiencing technical issues with their reservation systems, they finally did what I knew they would. They drove to my mother's house, the only safe place left. They had no idea I'd orchestrated every step. Meanwhile, I returned to the office, my old kingdom, now occupied by snakes. I parked the company car, unlocked the door, walked inside, and threw my final Molotov cocktail. Then I torched the car. What Rebecca, Mark, and dear old Edward didn't know was that I had already canceled the insurance on both the building and the vehicle. They weren't getting a dime. After that, I made my way on foot to the scene of the first fire. The blaze was out of control. Firefighters were doing their best, hoses spraying wildly, foam and water pouring from exhausted trucks. And there he was, Edward Lancaster, decked out in custom white firefighting gear, helmet, and all shouting orders like a general under siege. The department he had underfunded for years was struggling. They were half drunk, undertrained, and wildly unequipped to handle something of this magnitude. Police were running around like headless chickens, radios squawking, trying to piece together what was happening. But no one could stop me. No one even noticed me. Why? Because Edward had alienated everyone, refused to sign mutual aid agreements with neighboring departments, rejected offers for upgraded equipment, cut budgets wherever he could to maximize efficiency. The man had built a sandcastle and called it a fortress. And now it was crumbling. I walked up behind him, slid a small wooden dowel into his back, and clicked on the voice modulator again. Darth Vader's robotic rasp filled the space between us. Don't move, don't turn around, or you might end up seriously hurt. Edward froze. Shut up and listen, I continued. Your city is burning, and it's your fault. If you want this to stop, fix yourself. No one is safe from retribution, not even you. Your own house is gone. That's real. That's now. I leaned closer. Stop being an arrogant prick, or you'll see what real retribution looks like. He began to stammer something. Turning slightly so, I pushed him. Hard. He fell face first into a slick patch of mud, completely ruining his pristine white gear. He tried to rise, gasping, but I kicked him again, planting him back down with a wet slap. Then I turned and walked away, vanishing into the crowd of confused, frightened onlookers. No one stopped me. No one even looked twice. I slipped back to the hidden pickup and drove far beyond the town limits, not stopping until the smoke was no longer visible in my rearview mirror. I didn't know if they'd come after me. Maybe. Even a corrupt police force has to pretend to investigate a citywide arson spree. But I didn't care anymore. I crossed 3 state lines and settled in a large metro area, far from Milltown. I didn't change my name. I didn't fake ID or invent a new persona. What was the point? I couldn't see my kids. Rebecca had allowed Mark to adopt them. My name had been wiped away like chalk off a blackboard. I didn't have the money for lawyers or child support anyway, not on paper. So I didn't fight. Instead, I took a quiet IT job, same kind of work, just with less soul. No ownership, no office, no clients shaking my hand, but it paid the bills. I waited months before making my first move. I picked up the phone and dialed my mom's landline. I was so paranoid about being tracked that I drove 50 miles away from my apartment just to make a phone call. I parked in an empty rest stop, checked the horizon, powered up the burner phone I'd bought in cash, and finally dialed my mom's landline. She answered on the second ring, voice cautious, like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she heard my voice. "Oh, Alex. Thank God." Her words poured out fast, a dam broken. I could hear the mix of relief and worry. It hit me harder than I expected. "I thought you might have been in the building when it burned," she said. "For days. Nobody knew where you went. When they couldn't find a body, someone started saying maybe you left a resignation letter for Rebecca and Mark and just left town. But of course, the letter went up in flames too." She paused. "I'm just glad you're alive." I sat in silence for a moment, staring out at the horizon. Then she continued, her voice a little lighter, but filled with disbelief. "You're not going to believe this. Rebecca and Mark didn't get married." "What?" I blinked. Turns out, Mark was already married, in another state, never got a divorce. Real winner, huh? Rebecca didn't know. When it came out, she was humiliated. The adoption? Canceled. And she and the kids. They moved in with me for a while, until she found a place of her own. It's actually smaller than your old house. Imagine that. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. She kept going. And get this. Most of the homes and businesses that burned down, they were all insured through an agency affiliated with Lancaster Savings and Loan. After the disaster, the claims were so massive that the insurance company waived the deductibles just to avoid lawsuits. But the investigators, well, let's just say they didn't like what they found. Edward, the fire chief, remember? He was supposed to have done pre-planning for fire response. Instead, they found evidence of years of neglect. No updates, no mutual aid agreements with neighboring counties. Nothing. They sued him, Alex. The insurance company is suing Edward Lancaster personally for negligence. I let out a slow breath. That was unexpected. "Oh, and another thing," she added. "A new bank just opened a branch here. A real one, not Edward's legacy institution. They gave loans to a lot of the business owners who were burned out. Lancaster Bank's profits took a massive hit. I didn't even realize this, but apparently, the bank has a board of directors. And guess what? They're not happy. Edward's on a short leash now. Word is, they're looking to push him out." My lips curved into something that felt close to a smile for the first time in months. "And," she continued, her voice lower, "since Rebecca didn't marry that creep, she went to the judge and withdrew the protective order. She wants to hear from you, the kids. They still ask about you, every day, especially when they come here after school." I clenched the phone tighter. I wasn't sure what to say. She even filed a motion to modify the divorce. Because it hadn't hit the 90-day mark, it technically wasn't finalized yet. I think legally you two are still married. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. "And the kicker?" my mom said with a short laugh. "You remember Judge Ellsworth's car collection? You probably never saw it, but he had a whole secret garage of vintage cars. All gone. Burned." I raised my eyebrows. "Seriously?" "Rumor is Edward insured them under his name to save Ellsworth money on premiums. But the payout? Barely anything. A few hundred per vehicle. Gossips say the judge lost over $1 million. Now he hates Edward's guts." I leaned back in the seat, absorbing all of it. We're getting a new police chief, too. The current sheriff didn't run again. A bunch of deputies and officers quit. Guess they didn't want to go down with the ship. And Rebecca's parents? Still homeless. That house is toast. They've been trying to find a place to live while a new one's built, but no one wants to work with them. No builder will take the job. They're pariahs now. She even asked me if I'd sell or rent your old house to them, my mom said with a quiet scoff. I thought about it for a second. Then I told her, because of how you treated my son, there is no way I'd let you step foot in that house again. Let them live in a tent. I stared at the dashboard, processing everything. One piece of me felt vindicated. The other? Still shattered. I couldn't trust them with my home and not after everything. And I think that finally hit Ronald where it hurt. I heard he was livid, but with legal troubles breathing down his neck, even the county taxman had apparently told him to sit down and shut up. Oh, and about that tax payment they claimed my mom hadn't made? Magically found. Right after the night, his cars and van mysteriously caught fire. Funny how that works. Suddenly, tax records were cleaned up, neighbors were smiling again, and Ronald's grip on the town evaporated like smoke. People started talking about the fires like they were some kind of purge, like something dark had been burned away, and what remained was finally free. Fire can be cleansing, one business owner reportedly said. And now my mom, she ended the call with a familiar warmth in her voice. So, when are you coming to visit your old mother and your children? I grinned, for real this time. I think it's time to plan a trip back, I told her. Though I might need to buy a better car. My current one barely made it to the state line last time. See you soon, Mom. That was the moment I paused, took a breath, and realized what I'd survived. The absurd, humiliating terms of that ambush divorce, the emotional nuclear fallout, the betrayal, the theft, the erasure. And then the fire. My fire. I had taken my revenge. I didn't kill anyone. Only a few volunteer firefighters ended up with minor burns or sprains, those that even managed to respond. That is, I warned Rebecca. I used a voice synthesizer so she'd take it seriously. I told her to leave the house with the kids. She did. Then she drove to her parents and found their mansion in Gulf too. I disappeared after that. Vanished into a new life. In a city hundreds of miles away. It was quiet, anonymous, and for the first time in a long time, mine. But even there, when I thought about my mother's home or the town I grew up in, I still called it home. Even now, it's hard to think of that place as just a chapter in the past. My entire adult life had been built there, and then destroyed, spectacularly. It's been nearly 3 years since that collapse since my marriage, or rather, my entire world exploded. To this day, I still don't fully understand why they did it. If Rebecca had just come to me and said, I'm in love with someone else, I'm leaving, I would have been devastated, heartbroken, maybe even bitter, but I could have respected that. Instead, she and Mark and Edward conspired to set me up, to ruin me. They didn't just want out, they wanted me crushed, humiliated, erased. They tried to take my children from me, then dangle visitation rights like a pity prize. The only thing Judge Ellsworth gave me was the ability to see my kids. Everything else, my business, my dignity, my future gone. I was demoted to an employee in my own company and slapped with outrageous alimony and child support, despite earning a fraction of what I used to. They even stripped my parental rights, like I never existed. And worst of all, my town, the place I'd loved and helped build, turned its back on me. Not a whisper of support, not a handshake, not even a quiet, sorry man in passing. People I'd done business with for years acted like I was poison. I felt alone, utterly, crushingly alone. So alone that I didn't even trust the courts in the state capital. I believed Edward had his claws in everything, even there. And judging by what happened in Milltown, I wasn't crazy to think that. I still had friends, silent ones, a few people who helped me where they could, but none of them could openly stand against the Lancaster family without risking everything: loans, jobs, reputations. I never wanted to pull them into the fire, so I didn't. But I knew some of them just maybe suffered because of what I did that night, because of what I became. To this day, I still don't know whether local law enforcement ever launched a real investigation, or if they just buried the whole thing out of fear or shame. But I never changed my name, never altered my identity, never stopped doing the work I was good at. Still, part of me watched every shadow and waited. I never told anyone where I'd moved. Not even my mother knew the exact address. I trusted her, but not with that. The company I worked for was a large regional tech firm with a centralized HR department and a hardwired obsession with cybersecurity. Ironically, that worked to my advantage. They were known for battling cybercrime, and data breaches privacy was their brand, and mine, by necessity. Rebecca might not have known where I lived, but I was pretty damn sure she knew who I worked for. Child support still came out of my paycheck like clockwork, landing in her account every Friday. But beyond that, she hit a wall. I specifically requested HR to reject any inquiries about my private info address, phone number, emergency contacts. Didn't matter if it was her lawyer, or the Pope. Deny it all. And they did. The company's paranoia about breaches played to my favor. After all, nothing ruins your reputation as a data security company like being caught leaking your own employees' information. Still, every couple of months, HR would quietly notify me. "We've had some interest in your file again." It was always the same pattern: Rebecca's lawyer, or Rebecca herself, trying to sneak past the gates. Email, phone calls, even snail mail. She once even impersonated my mother in an attempt to bluff her way in. Didn't work. They had protocols, and they stuck to them. Now, if law enforcement or a federal prosecutor had issued a subpoena, of course, they'd have to hand over my info. But that never happened. Not once. Still, I stayed careful. I changed phones regularly, used burners. Every time I called Mom, I drove 50 miles away from my place first, sometimes more. She'd gotten used to it. Sometimes I'd text her first from the new number just to say, "It's me," so she didn't panic or think it was some robocall or scam. Once she confirmed it, I'd call. Our conversations were always a mix of the same ingredients: family news, updates on the kids, local gossip, and of course, stories about her, Rebecca, and the old monster himself, Edward. For some bizarre reason, after Mark's big secret came out, the whole still married in another state thing, and he left town like the coward he was, Rebecca started insisting that she and I were still married. Legally, technically, that may have been true, but in practice, that bridge had burned to ash. She kept bugging my mom, pleading with her to convince me to come back, that there was still a chance, that we could make it work. Yeah, number. Over the years, I snuck back into town more than once. Not to see her, just to make sure my mom was okay. And, honestly, to make sure she wasn't sharing anything with Rebecca. My mother, God bless her, is the kind of devout Christian who believes in turning the other cheek if someone cuts your throat on the first one. I didn't put it past her to try and broker peace without my consent. So I made unannounced visits, just popped in, smiled, and scanned the room for any sign of betrayal. She was always surprised, always a little annoyed but relieved. I think part of her was proud I'd gotten so good at disappearing. Eventually, I ditched the old pickup truck. Thing had more rattles than an old man's knees, but it got me through the darkest stretches. Once I had enough saved up cash only, of course I bought a newer, more fuel-efficient vehicle. Clean title. No financing. Why no loan? Simple. I didn't trust banks. Not after what Edward had done. To receive my paycheck, I had to keep a checking account. So I opened one with a large national chain, something too big for Edward's shadow to reach. I withdrew most of the money on payday and dumped it into a brokerage account under another institution's umbrella. Credit score? Absolute trash. Turns out, My dear ex-father-in-law had reported that I'd defaulted on every loan tied to his bank, even the ones I paid off years ago. I could have fought it, filed formal disputes with the credit bureaus, hired a lawyer, but that would have left a trail, and I wasn't in the mood to be seen, let alone known. So I paid cash. For everything. Gas? Cash. Groceries? Cash. Repairs, tolls, motel rooms, clothes, all of it cash. Sure, it took more time. Prepaying at every gas station, estimating fuel, never filling the tank all the way just in case. But that was the price of freedom. No paper trail. No exposure. No vulnerabilities. Just silence, strategy, and survival. I always carried a couple thousand in cash, never all in one place. A few hundred stashed in my wallet, a few more in my glove compartment, some in a hidden pocket under the passenger seat, and the rest divided into zippered bags tucked away in my travel gear. Redundancy was the game. If one stash got lost or stolen, I still had backups. I wasn't about to let a flat tire or a blown fuel pump trap me somewhere with no way to move. Before I bought my car, I did my research. I checked which make and color was the most common on American roads, just your standard, blend-in-and-be-ignored vehicle. Then I found a gently used model of that exact car. Older, reliable, nothing flashy. It sipped gas and didn't ask for much in return. Mechanically sound, invisible to the eye, exactly what I needed. On the road, I kept a list of motels places not tied to any chain, places that didn't ask questions and still accepted cash. Clean, quiet, off the interstate, no digital check-ins. No loyalty programs, no trail. And when I said routes earlier, I meant it. Plural. I never took the same path home twice. Sometimes I'd tack on an extra 150, 200 miles just to change the pattern, just in case Rebecca ever caught wind that I was back in town and sicked a private investigator on me. Paranoia? Maybe. But it wasn't born from fantasy. Nearly my entire hometown had turned its back on me, people I'd grown up with, gone to school with, worked with, laughed with. All of them gone the moment Edward flipped the switch. Rebecca didn't just betray me emotionally. She orchestrated a complete social wipeout. And that kind of betrayal, yeah, it makes you paranoid. Some people, including my ever-forgiving mother, still believed I should go back to Rebecca. She's changed, they'd say. She's sorry. Nope, not happening. So every now and then, I take a week off and make the trip back to Courtroom, USA. Not for her, for my kids, for my mom. From what Mom told me during our calls, Lily and Max, Mikani and Teddy came straight to her house after school every day. Rebecca still had custody, technically, but with her working late hours, she leaned on my mother more than she'd ever admit. Apparently, she'd been stretched thin trying to sell credit loans in a market where a new bank had set up shop and stolen half her client base. She was also trying to keep my old IT business alive. From what I gathered, barely. And my old clients? They hadn't forgotten me. Mom told me more than once. They said they'd come back in a heartbeat if you ever reopened. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. I missed home. I missed the people, at least the ones who hadn't buried their spines. But deep down, I knew that version of Kulon no longer existed. Not for me. Still, I planned my visits carefully. I never warned anyone, especially not Mom. I knew she meant well, but if she gave Rebecca a heads up, everything could go sideways fast. So I always arrived unannounced, always within minutes of the kids showing up. That way, Rebecca wouldn't have time to react or interfere. I'd pull up, park down the block, walk to the house quickly, and knock. When Mom opened the door, I'd greet her with a hug and first thing ask for her phone. I'd slip it into my pocket before she could text Rebecca or anyone else. Then came the best part. Seeing my kids. Lily, Connie to me and little Max would light up the second they saw me. They'd run across the room and leap into my arms before I even had time to kneel. They'd talk over each other, breathless. telling me everything they'd done since our last visit, like they were afraid I'd disappear again too soon. Once we had our fill of hugs and ketchup, I'd pack Theme and Momento the car and head to a neighboring town, about an hour out. A place where no one knew us, where I could just be dad. We'd eat fast food, watch a kid-friendly movie, maybe hit a children's museum or feed the ducks at the lake in the city park. Something simple, joyful, real. Something that reminded me who I was and who I was fighting for. Of course, these evenings always came with one non-negotiable part of the ritual. Mom's lecture. The world needs more forgiveness, she'd say. Holding on to anger only keeps you hostage. She'd quote scripture, tell me how God turned pain into purpose, remind me to turn the other cheek. I eventually reached the point where I'd just nod through Mom's lectures, smile, let her say her piece. It didn't change anything. Her words didn't dig deep anymore, just bounced off the hardened shell I'd built to survive. She kept talking about Rebecca, though, about how she didn't smile like she used to, about how tired she looked, how she always asked about me, how she wanted to see me, wanted to apologize. But you know what never happened? She never actually apologized. Rebecca had all the words in the world about wanting forgiveness, but never used the ones that mattered. I'm sorry. And Mom? She never said anything about whether Rebecca still loved me. That part stayed unspoken, like they both knew the answer, but neither wanted to say it out loud. And I knew the truth anyway. So why open that wound? Then, one day, it almost all went to hell. We were walking through a park, the kids skipping ahead, Mom strolling beside me. I happened to glance down and caught her with my phone in her hand, texting. Not just texting Rebecca. I froze. Rage boiled up instantly. My jaw locked. My fists clenched. For a second, I almost snatched the phone out of her hand and screamed at her. But then I looked at her. Really looked. This was the woman who carried me for 9 months, who wiped my nose and my ass and made me grilled cheese when my world fell apart, who stayed up late when I was sick and early when I was lost. I took a long breath and kept my voice level. What are you doing, Mom? She looked up like a kid caught sneaking cookies. Alex, it's simple. Rebecca's worried. She thinks you might kidnap the kids. She just wants to know they're safe. Kidnap? I laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. She's their mother, Mom said. Isn't that a reasonable concern? No, I said sharply. Not after what she pulled. I don't trust her not an inch. She lies, manipulates, plays victim, and weaponizes the law. If she knows where we are, the cops will be here in 5 minutes. And this time, they won't just look around. I wanted to call Rebecca every name in the book, but the kids were close listening. So I bit my tongue and led everyone to the car. We drove a few blocks away and parked in the corner of a dark, half-empty lot behind a restaurant. Engine off, lights out. And sure enough, just a few minutes later, 3 patrol cars pulled up to the restaurant. We'd just left 2 officers per vehicle. My mom's eyes widened. They might not be here for you, she said weakly. I just nodded, watching silently as the cops slowly exited their vehicles and began scanning the area. They looked inside the front entrance, searched the lot, checked a few side streets. But they didn't see my car. Tinted windows, engine cold, parked deep in the shadows. Eventually, they gave up and drove off. But Mom, she still didn't get it. She used me, I told her, her own mother-in-law, just to try to trap me. What kind of person does that? She just wants to talk to you, Mom said again. Maybe if you two sat down together, you could finally work this out. Maybe even... I cut her off. No, Mom. You want to know what she'd say? Call her right now. Put her on speaker. Let's both hear it. Mom hesitated but handed me the phone. I dialed. She answered almost instantly. Margaret. Rebecca's voice came through. Did they get him? Is he in custody? I didn't say a word, just stared out the windshield, jaw tight. The kids, hearing her voice, also went quiet, watching me. I told them he kidnapped my children and fled town, Rebecca continued, not knowing she was on speaker. He took them without telling me he doesn't get to do that. Mom's face went pale. Her voice trembled. No, Rebecca. Alex didn't kidnap anyone. I texted you, and he saw it. He let us out before the cops arrived. We watched from the parking lot. He has the legal right to see his children. That's in the court order, remember? There was silence on the other end. And then the cold, hard truth settled in. Mom turned to me. She tried to have you arrested. For visiting your own kids. For spending time with your family. I nodded slowly. Now you finally see. Rebecca didn't want to talk. She wanted control. I thought you were going to come join us, Mom said to Rebecca, her voice tight with hurt. Not send the police. There was a pause on the other end. Then Rebecca's voice shifted soft, calculated, rehearsed. I just wanted to make sure he'd actually sit down and talk to me, she said. I figured if he was in custody, well, he'd have no choice but to talk. I could drop the charges then and we'd see what happens. I shook my head, disgusted. Yeah, sure. She'd drop the charges, but only if I agreed to something that would benefit her at my expense. That was always the game with Rebecca. Leverage, not love. Then she asked the one question that set my teeth on edge. Where are you guys now? I want my children to be safe. With me. That was it. I snapped. They are safe, I said, voice low and tight. With me. With their grandmother. What they're not safe from is you, from your games, your lies, your manipulations. You wanted the police to arrest me in front of my own kids. Did you even stop for 1 second to think what that would do to them? I kept driving as I spoke, pulling out of the parking lot. They'd have to watch their father, someone they trust, get thrown in handcuffs because you decided to twist the law to make a point. The rage was boiling now. My voice was rising, and the kids in the back seat started to squirm. You really believed I'd kidnap my children? That I'd take them away from their own mother forever? Even a mother like you? I caught myself mid-sentence. I had almost dropped the word I didn't want my kids to hear. If Rebecca was nearby, I was sure she was scanning the neighborhood, trying to find us, maybe even following us. I think I saw her headlights pulling into another driveway just as we turned off the street. Mom didn't say a word, but the look she gave me, she didn't need to. It was sharp, disappointed, but not surprised. We rode in silence for a minute before I gave Rebecca my final words. We're going home now. You'll have to think up some new false charge if you want me arrested next time. Mom ended the call without another word, right as Lily and Max began to cry softly in the back seat. The tension in the car had finally cracked them. That's when shame hit me. I'd almost called their mother something vile, right in front of them, and as much as I believed she deserved it, they didn't need that image of their father burning in their minds. Mom whispered something to Rebecca before hanging up, probably trying to soothe things, and then turned in her seat to calm the kids. I kept driving, jaw clenched, hands tight on the wheel. It took several miles before Lily stopped wiping her eyes and Max stopped sniffling. I still didn't know what I was going to say to them. How do you explain that their mom tried to have their dad arrested not for anything he did, but because she couldn't control him anymore? And worse, how do you explain that it wasn't the first time? The rest of the ride, I couldn't shake the fear. Every time I passed a car on the highway, I checked the mirrors. Every intersection, I expected flashing lights. My brain ran loops of worst-case scenarios. What if there's an APB? What if they flagged my license plate? But I had to keep telling myself, no one knows the car. No one knows the plates. No one even knows the make or model. Still, my fingers hovered near the hazard lights, ready to bolt at the first sign of red and blue. I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror. Every few seconds, my eyes flicked up, scanning headlights, taillights, any sign of flashing red and blue. I kept my speed just under the limit, my hands steady on the wheel, calm on the outside, paranoia pumping through every vein. Back in Coulon, I didn't take the direct route. I came in the long way, weaving along the outer county roads that circled the town like a forgotten belt, Then I looped in from an angle no one would expect, especially not law enforcement. If anyone was waiting on the main road, they'd never see me coming. I parked several blocks away from Mom's house and walked the surrounding streets, slow and alert, watching for parked cars, silhouettes in windows, anything that felt off. Nothing. So I pulled around to the back street near her driveway. As soon as we reached the house, I let Mom and the kids out. No lingering, no hugs at the curb. The moment they shut the doors behind them, I hit the gas and drove straight out of town. Then, just like I always did, I circled back. Yeah, I know, I'm paranoid. But I also got away again. That week, I followed my usual plan. Rented a motel a few miles outside of town under a generic name and paid cash. I visited the kids each day, slipping in and out quietly like a ghost. But something about this visit felt more exposed. I started getting the uneasy sense that Rebecca might have figured out I was nearby. Maybe she was watching the kids more closely, waiting for a pattern. So, after a few days, I drove for hours, just kept putting distance between me and Kulon until the edge of the map felt safe again. Eventually, I pulled into a roadside motel somewhere that barely had a name. A bed, 4 walls, and a decent enough Wi-Fi signal. Something had to change. I was tired of hiding, tired of second-guessing everything. So I decided to try something different. I called her video this time. I made sure the background was blank, just a plain wall behind me. Nothing that could give away my location. As soon as the call ended, I planned to pack up and vanish again. I knew how these things worked. A motel's IP address could lead someone right to my door, and I wasn't about to take chances. I figured she'd have time to collect the kids and get them to bed by the time she figured anything out. I hit the call button. To my surprise, she picked up on the first ring. Even after all this time, 3 years, to be exact, she still looked good. Not flawless, not glowing, but polished, familiar, and completely foreign all at once. "Alex," she said softly, "I'm so glad to see you. Why didn't you just come to the house? The kids would have loved to see you." I stared at her, unreadable, then said, "Because I don't know if the police are waiting on the other side of your front door." Her face changed just for a second, like she hadn't expected me to say that. Or maybe she had, and hoped I wouldn't. "Someone in your orbit still believes I'm to blame for everything that's happened," I continued. "Your life, your dad's fall from grace, your failed engagement. I'm not walking into a trap just to be a headline again." She shook her head. "Alex, no one's looking for you. The state police came, and so did an arson investigator. They couldn't find enough evidence to accuse anyone. Sure, maybe they suspected you. I mean, you were the only person who left town around that time." She trailed off. "But people here hate my dad," she added, with a hint of bitterness. "They don't like the way he ran the town. For months after the fires, there were whispers. People saying he got what was coming." "Oh, I heard," I said. "Kicked out of the fire department, stripped from the board of trustees. Quite the fall from his ivory tower." "Nothing like this could have happened to a more deserving person," she said. And for once, I believed her. "I don't care about him," I told her. "I just want to see my kids. Period. Everyone else, they can jump off a cliff." She smiled, a little sadly. "Are you still in town? Can I see you?" I laughed, cold and flat. "See me? For what? To get me arrested for kidnapping my own children? You know, the ones I'm legally allowed to visit at any time, with no warning and no restrictions?" She looked stunned. I could tell she didn't expect me to throw that back at her so directly. "I just thought," she started, "that if we talked, maybe you'd calm down. I never would have pressed charges." I raised an eyebrow. "Sure, until the next time I roll a stop sign or go 5 miles over the limit. And then what? I get pulled over, and suddenly there's a record that says, 'Suspected child abductor.' You don't have to convict someone to ruin them, Rebecca. You just have to point." And that was the game she'd played all along. "I've already been detained once for kidnapping," I said, flatly. "Doesn't matter that I wasn't tried or convicted. Doesn't matter that I had court-approved visitation. That little line in a database somewhere will pop up every time I get pulled over, every time my name is searched, and that label never really disappears. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her a chance. And what happens if you withdraw your complaint now? Won't that make it a false report? That would look fantastic on your record, wouldn't it? She barely blinked. They'd never do that to me. My dad would never let it happen. Of course, still the same old Rebecca, wrapped in a bubble of entitlement and blind faith in Daddy's influence. I have the right to protect my family, she said, her voice tightening, even if it means bending some rules. You broke trust, not me. Then she hit me with it. You're not my ex-husband. Not legally. We're still married. My jaw clenched. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. I have paperwork. Finalized. You told me I wasn't their father anymore. That's why I call them your children. Rebecca leaned in slightly. After the fire, I went to Judge Ellsworth. There was still time less than 90 days since the initial ruling. I filed to cancel the divorce before it was finalized. The judge signed off on it, especially after everything that happened with my father. Her eyes narrowed. I think he was still furious about losing his car collection. I stared at her, disbelief rolling into pure, exhausted rage. And your dad got pissed about that? She nodded. He was furious, but I don't understand why. What did you do to make him so angry? I laughed bitterly, eyes hard. What did I do? I leaned closer to the screen. I was happy, Rebecca. I had a wife, 2 amazing kids, a successful business, and respect in the community. And then, in the blink of an eye, I had nothing. Nothing but threats of jail time, false accusations, and court orders stripping me of my rights, all because you and your family set me up. Her face faltered. Just a flicker. I had to run, I said, because I knew the next knock on the door wouldn't be from a mailman. It'd be from cops with a warrant someone forged in a judge's golf cart. That's not what we wanted at all, she said quietly. None of it. Not like that. I laughed again, but there was nothing funny in it. Really? I asked. Then tell me, why did you make me give up my kids without warning? Why did you ambush me with court paperwork and no legal counsel? Why did you take over my company and then offer me a minimum wage job like I was lucky to even be included? She shook her head in denial, but I wasn't done. And just so I'm clear on who's in charge, let's rewind to that final night. You seduced me like nothing was wrong, had me in bed like everything was fine. Then, the next morning, you dropped the hammer, took the kids, called me names, slammed the door, and walked out. My chest tightened, but I didn't stop. You tore my life apart and stomped on the pieces while they were still moving. The final straw? I continued, voice turning cold. Your father tried to have my mother evicted, filed bogus tax claims to force her out of the only home she had left. You people tried to put her on the street, an old woman. For what? Revenge? Rebecca's voice went small. Dad would never. Don't lie to me, I snapped. Don't you dare. I know what happened. And I laughed when I realized he finally got burned. You know why? Because karma doesn't always miss. She looked stunned. I think it was finally sinking in. Everything you and your family did to me. If you'd just come to me and told me the truth that you'd fallen back in love with Marky, would have let you go. I wouldn't have fought. I don't believe in keeping someone who doesn't love me. Her lip trembled. She didn't speak. But no, you had to take everything. You needed to destroy me so completely that I couldn't even stand up again. And why? I asked. Because Daddy said it would keep me around, that if I gave up custody, I'd still have to provide income, that it was safer that way for your side of the family. I leaned back, hollow and exhausted. Yeah, that worked great. After all, it's not like your father ruined my credit, spread rumors that stopped me from buying food, or made it impossible to fuel up my own company car. I couldn't even buy a damn chair. Furniture? Forget it. People wouldn't sell to me. They wouldn't talk to me. If I needed something, it had to show up like magic, like some underground blessing whispered through the right ears. Otherwise, I was on my own. You stripped me of everything, and then still expected me to foot the bill. And when that wasn't enough, you went after the one person I had left, my mother. That was the last straw. I couldn't let you bastards touch her. Not her. I'd already lost my home, my kids, my identity. I wasn't about to let you destroy the one person who had stood by me through it all. Damn, I muttered as I felt it, me heart racing, voice trembling. I think I just confessed. Panic flickered behind my eyes. What if she was recording the call? What if this was it, the final puzzle piece Ronald needed to send me away for good? I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, to shut it all down. Rebecca was still on the screen, her mouth moving, still trying to spin the story like she always did. But I didn't hear a word of it. I disconnected the call mid-sentence, the screen going black. My whole body was trembling. I needed to go. Now. I grabbed my bag, tossed it into the passenger seat, and drove. No direction, just motion. I put hundreds of miles between me and that motel anywhere but there. Eventually, I pulled off a quiet rural highway and hid the car behind a thick grove of trees, parked under the stars. No headlights, no sound, just silence and exhaustion. I fell asleep behind the wheel, adrenaline finally burning off like smoke in the cold night air. That was the closest I'd ever come to being exposed during one of my secret trips to see the kids. Way too close. From that point on, I went back to strict protocol. Every contact with my mom happened on a burner phone. Sometimes I used Skype to video call the kids when I was far enough away from any traceable location. Watching them grow through a screen was heartbreaking. Connie's laugh, Ted's crooked front teeth, but I couldn't risk being there full time. Not yet. Eventually, I saved up enough to hire a lawyer. Paid her in cash. Quiet, discreet, professional. I needed someone who could verify my legal status without drawing attention. Turned out Rebecca wasn't lying, technically. We were still married. That revelation changed everything. I immediately removed the child support deduction from my paycheck. If I was still legally her husband, there was no grounds for forced payments. Instead, I redirected the same amount to my mother, with instructions, use this money for Connie and Ted, only them, not Rebecca. I know. Deep down, she probably handed the whole thing over anyway, but doing it that way made me feel safer, like I had some say again. My lawyer also uncovered something else. The adoption paperwork? Canceled. Apparently, Mark, the same guy who broke up my family, had no real interest in parenting unless it came with status, perks, and full ownership. When it became clear he couldn't get rid of his other wife and kids in time, he bailed. I could have tracked him down, exposed him, but I didn't. Let him disappear. Let him rot wherever he ended up. He was already irrelevant. Once I confirmed my marital status, I went ahead and filed for divorce again. But this time, I was in control. I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into a war that I chose. That also meant I'd have to return to Coulon for the hearing. My lawyer was confident. There's no open investigation, she said. Nothing on record. You'll be fine. Still, I didn't trust it. Ronald may have been publicly neutered, but I knew better than to assume the snake was dead just because it lost its fangs. I went in prepared. The day before the hearing, I rolled into town after dark and checked into a tiny motel on the outskirts. I registered under my go-to alias, John Smith. The owner gave me a node, remembered me. Understood the rules. No questions, no visitors, no trace. I slept light that night, one eye open, fully clothed. No weapons, no protection. I couldn't risk bringing anything with Minot with metal detectors in the courthouse now, not even a pocket knife. If Ronald made a move in the courtroom, I'd have to take it, bare-handed. The next morning, the hearing began. And who was presiding? Judge Ellsworth, the same smug bastard who helped Rebecca destroy me the first time. He opened the session by immediately turning to Rebecca and her lawyer. "What exactly are you asking for at this hearing?" he said. And that's when I heard the last thing I ever expected. She wants reconciliation, her lawyer said. Counseling. She wants to restore the marriage. Rebecca wanted me back, as her husband. But when I came back from college, suddenly she wanted to date, and it wasn't subtle. And honestly, I never really understood why. Back in high school, I was one of those kids who did it all, starting quarterback during football season, power forward on the basketball team, ran the 1,000 and 2,000 meters in track, and played center field in baseball. I wasn't some cocky jock, but yeah, I was pretty good at sports. Meanwhile, Julia wasn't exactly stuck up, not officially. If you accused her of it, she'd laugh and claim she was misunderstood. But let's be honest, she carried herself like someone who knew she was a step above the rest of us. That was just her vibe. She dated Mark Bishop, another golden boy. Quarterback, point guard, baseball pitcher. The kind of guy who could throw a touchdown on Friday, dunk on Saturday, and hit a home run Sunday. Solid guy, too. They split when he went off to a different university on a football scholarship. As I said, Julia and I weren't in the same orbit. In college, she rose straight to the top of the biggest sorority on campus. And of course, their brother fraternity was the largest and loudest on campus, too. Their lives were a never-ending stream of themed parties, charity galas, weekend getaways, and tailgates that required actual planning committees. Me, I was in the lab. I spent my time outside of class either working or digging deeper into the nuts and bolts of systems, architecture, software development, hardware optimization, you name it. I was that guy who actually read user manuals and got excited about debugging kernel issues. My major demanded every spare second I had. On top of that, I held down a job to make up for what my meager scholarship didn't cover. My dad managed Harvey's Market, not exactly a high roller position. His paycheck kept us afloat but didn't leave room for much else. I didn't qualify for grants because we weren't poor enough on paper, but we were far from comfortable. Just to give you a sense of the gap between our worlds, you could take my childhood home, multiply the square footage by 4, and it still wouldn't touch the size of Edward Lancaster's mansion. During summer breaks, Dad and I used to go hiking almost every weekend. Fishing too. Low cost, peaceful, and honest fun. Meanwhile, Julia and her family were jetting off to Aspen, the Ozarks, Miami, even Hawaii. One summer they went to Maine just to see the fog roll in. That was their idea of fun. We were from the same town but lived on different planets. And yet, when I returned home after college, Julia suddenly took an interest in me. She didn't just flirt, she pursued me. It felt like she was on a mission. And to this day, I've never fully understood why. Sure, I'd started my own company, but at the time, it was just me and a dream. I'd applied for a small business grant and scraped together enough capital to get things off the ground. After the first year, I was barely breaking even, but I had momentum. Then one night, I ran into her at a local bar. There was a live band playing, and we were both there by coincidence or fate, depending on how poetic you want to get. She walked over, smiled, and asked me to dance. I'd like to say I swept her off her feet, but really, I just didn't embarrass myself. My mom had insisted I learn the basics of swing, waltz, and a few other styles. Turns out, that paid off. We danced, we clicked, and when the bar closed down, we stood outside her car, the night air swirling around us. She kissed me, hard. Then she made me promise to call the next day for a real date. And I did. I was an only child. My mother had a medical condition that made having more kids nearly impossible. I was the miracle she'd somehow carried to term. Julia had an older brother, though. He bolted at 18 and never looked back. Nobody really talked about it, but I always had the sense he despised Edward, maybe even feared him. 1 year after, I wasn't allowed to speak. All I could do was sit there and shake my head slowly, silently, as Rebecca spun her story to the court. According to her, our marriage had just been a series of misunderstandings, a whirlwind of emotional confusion and unresolved feelings. She told the judge she'd been lost, unsure, still trying to figure out what she wanted. Please. It was pure, unfiltered nonsense, and somehow, Judge Ellsworth looked like he was buying it. The same guy who slammed the gavel on me during our original divorce now sat there nodding along to her emotional clarity. Then came her turn to accuse me again of abandoning my family. That's when my lawyer stood up. And finally, it was our turn. She laid it out clean. No drama, no exaggeration, just the facts. She even touched gently in the night of fire and retribution. She didn't outright name it. She didn't need to. The implication was enough. When she began describing the judge's own behavior from the original hearing, he interrupted her with immediate objection. But she pushed back. Your Honor, everything that occurred during that first proceeding is a matter of public record. Nothing I've said is speculation. These actions, this imbalance, were not imagined, they were documented. He stopped, didn't argue, just sat there for a long moment, eyes narrowing slightly. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Recognition, or maybe fear. I think he realized something then. If I burned him the way I burned Ronald, his own garage full of collectible cars might be next. I gave him a small nod. Not a threat, just a reminder. He leaned back, falling quiet. My lawyer continued, walking the court through the events step by step. And when she got to the part where Rebecca called the cops on me for visiting my own children, Judge Ellsworth suddenly snapped back to life. He leaned forward, sharp and focused, not looking at me, looking directly at Rebecca. Is this true? He asked. Did you file a formal complaint claiming Mr. Danvers abducted the children, despite this court having granted him unrestricted visitation? Rebecca froze, completely deer in headlights. She looked at her lawyer, searching for a lifeline, but he stayed quiet, hands folded, eyes forward. He wasn't going to save her. The judge turned more forceful. Why would Mr. Danvers return to this town just to reunite with someone who tried to destroy him? The same man who was legally steamrolled, shunned by his community, nearly criminalized, and now you want him back? He leaned in even further. Is it about the children? Or is this just another control play? What happens the next time you feel neglected? Are we going to be back here again, listening to you accuse him of crimes he didn't commit because your feelings were hurt? Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but her lawyer jumped up as if his chair had electrocuted him. Your Honor, we'd like a short recess to confer privately. My lawyer simply shrugged. No objection. Judge Ellsworth nodded, pounded his gavel, and left the room. Both attorneys followed. I sat there, silent, as the air seemed to stretch like rubber bands ready to snap. They were only gone a few minutes. When they returned, the judge looked pissed. Rebecca's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl into the floor. My lawyer? She was smiling faintly, like a cat who just watched a mouse run into a trap. Judge Ellsworth took his seat. And then, without warning, he called out, Mr. Edward Marston, please take the stand. I blinked. Edward, me former father-in-law, was in the courtroom. I hadn't seen him, had no idea he was there. As he stood and walked forward, he shot me a glare so full of bile, I could practically taste it in the air. He took the oath, settled into the witness seat like he owned the damn place, and looked straight ahead. Judge Ellsworth began. Mr. Marston, please tell the court why you're here today and what relevant contribution you believe you can make. Edward sneered. That same arrogant smirk he wore at every town function. He looked at the judge, then at me, and finally began to speak. And just like that, he started to unravel the very lie they had all worked so hard to maintain. I don't know why my stupid daughter wants that pathetic piece of garbage back, Edward Marston sneered, his face red, voice booming. He's brought nothing but heartache and disaster to our family. I can't even calculate how much money my bank and I lost because of his actions. Frankly, I want him in jail, and once he's there, I hope they throw away the damn key. The courtroom fell silent for a beat before Judge Ellsworth slammed his gavel down so hard it echoed. That's enough of the tirade, Mr. Marston, the judge snapped. Your daughter's counsel suggested you had relevant information for the court. If you've got something worth hearing, start talking. Now. I sat stunned, not that Edward hated me. That much was always clear. But this? This was him unmasked, totally unhinged, without filters or calculated manipulation, just raw hate. And oddly, the judge didn't reprimand him for the profanity. Not yet. Maybe he was giving Edward just enough rope to hang himself. Edward straightened in the witness box, still puffed up with self-importance. My daughter never should have married him, he snarled. He's from a no-name family, barely worth the dirt under our boots. When she brought him home, I was shocked. But she was stubborn. She wanted him. He turned toward me, his voice dripping with contempt. I tolerated it. Until Joshua Webster came to work for me. I knew Josh from back in the day. He and Rebecca were high school sweethearts. It just made sense. So I arranged for them to spend time together. Business, lunches, strategy sessions, off-site work trips. He smirked. My plan was simple. Get them close again. Let nature take its course. And it did. Took a little longer than I expected. But eventually, she cracked. Fell right under his spell. The courtroom was still. Not a breath. It's only a pity, he added with a twisted grin, that she didn't get pregnant by him. That would have sped things up. The judge's brow furrowed. And what about the minor detail that Joshua Webster was already married with children? Edward didn't flinch. The plan was for Rebecca to divorce Alex. Then Josh would quietly divorce his wife, give up rights to his own kids, and step in as the father to Lily and Max. That's what I wanted from the beginning. His eyes flared as he turned toward me. He never should have fathered anyone with my blood. The idea of him sitting at my table made me sick every single time. I could feel the air shift. This wasn't a courtroom anymore, it was a public execution, and Edward had tied the noose with his own words. The judge let him ramble for a few more moments before cutting in. Mr. Marston, was it your intention to drive Mr. Danvers out of town? Or perhaps have him imprisoned? Edward leaned back in his chair, smug. I wasn't interested in the details. But yeah, prison was the goal. That would have sealed it. He couldn't contest anything after that. The judge pressed further. Did you, or did you not, use your position at the bank to create conditions that might cause Mr. Danvers to violate the law? Edward didn't blink. Yes, I had Rebecca call him Poke the Bear. Then I'd tip off the police. Easy setup. Still don't know why he wasn't arrested. Guess someone dropped the ball. The judge stared at him, expression unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Marston. That'll be all. You can step down. Edward rose, but his face was still twisted in that smug, satisfied way he always wore when he thought he'd won. But that expression started to fade as the judge spoke again. I advise you to consult with your attorney, Mr. Marston. I will be forwarding the full transcript of this hearing and your testimony to the district attorney's office for review. A pause, then, for potential prosecution. The air left the room in an instant. You, sir, Judge Ellsworth continued, have abused your position of influence, manipulated legal systems, and orchestrated the targeted persecution of this man. And regrettably, some of that happened under my authority. He leaned forward, his voice suddenly lower, heavier. And that's something I intend to fix before I retire. And that's something I intend to correct before I retire. Judge Ellsworth finished, his voice heavy with finality. Ronald's smug confidence melted away. His face twisted into a sour, bitter frown like he couldn't believe the world had stopped orbiting around him. He glanced over at the judge, perhaps expecting a wink or nod of loyalty. But Ellsworth simply looked back at him and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Ronald's eyes dropped. His posture sagged. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the courtroom exit, head slightly bowed like a beaten dog. The king had finally realized his crown was gone. The judge turned to Rebecca's attorney. Do you have anything else before I make a decision? The lawyer jumped to his feet so fast he almost knocked his chair over. Yes, Your Honor. My client had no knowledge of the plans her father or Mr. Webster had put in motion. She was manipulated, misled. She's just as much a victim in all of this as Mr. Danvers. That's why she asked for counseling to rebuild their marriage and return to the happiness they had before Joshua Webster's interference. The judge turned to me and my lawyer. We both shook our heads. Ellsworth exhaled and leaned slightly forward, his tone shifting from firm to final. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," he said, "but even if you were an unknowing pawn in all of this and that's being generous, it doesn't excuse the absolute nightmare you put your husband through." He glanced down at his bench, then back up. "You tried to ruin him. Publicly, legally, financially. You tried to have him arrested under false pretenses twice. That's not love. That's control. I can't imagine any man in his right mind forgiving what you've done, let alone welcoming you back." Rebecca suddenly stood, her voice cracking as she shouted, "I love him, and the children need him. We need him." Her lawyer quickly grabbed her arm and whispered something into her ear, calming her just enough to stop her from being held in contempt. The judge didn't even flinch. "If your husband had asked for full custody today, I would have given it serious consideration based solely on how you've treated him. But he didn't. Because despite everything, he has acted with more integrity and compassion than anyone else in this room." He paused. "In fact, he hasn't asked for much at all. He isn't even requesting the return of his business." Then he picked up the gavel. "I find in favor of the plaintiff." The wood struck hard. Judge Ellsworth stood, gave one final nod, and exited the courtroom. For the first time in years, I felt it. Freedom. Real, unfiltered freedom. Rebecca sat down slowly, shaking with sobs she could no longer hide. Her lawyer leaned in to offer words I couldn't hear, but it didn't matter. Nothing he could say would undo what she'd done. My lawyer turned to me, extended her hand with a tight smile. "Congratulations. Would you like to file a civil suit against your ex-father-in-law for abuse of power, malicious prosecution, or all of the above?" I shook my head. My kids need to have some kind of relationship with that man and his wife, twisted as it may be. I won't be the one to take that from them." She nodded, silently respecting the choice. As we exited the courtroom, Rebecca rushed up behind me and grabbed my jacket sleeve. "Please," she whispered, "just talk to me. Please, Alex." I stopped walking for half a second. She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and desperation. She reached out again. That's when it happened. A blur of movement from the right side of my vision. I barely had time to react. Now, let me be clear, I'm not a fighter. I never served in the military. I don't train MMA. I'm not some street-smart vigilante. But I've seen The Quiet Man with John Wayne about a dozen times, and there's this one scene his brother-in-law takes a swing at him in the middle of a field. John ducks, and the punch sails past harmlessly. Then he drops the guy, with one perfect shot to the gut. That image had always stuck with me. And that instinct kicked in the moment Edward lunged. He came out of nowhere, fist flying, aimed straight for my head. I ducked just slightly, and his swing missed, throwing him off balance. It was the opening I needed. I stepped in and delivered a short, tight left hook to his gut just like Wayne did. It connected. Hard. All the air whooshed out of Edward's lungs like a deflating balloon. His face twisted in shock and agony as he doubled over, gasping, clutching his midsection like he'd been stabbed. I didn't stop there. As he bent forward, I brought my right hand up and cracked him clean across the jaw. His head snapped sideways, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap. I stood there, fists clenched, chest heaving, waiting to see if he'd get up for round two. He didn't. I wasn't going to hit him again, not in the face, not in the ribs, and definitely not where it would cause permanent damage, not in front of witnesses. Even though, in that moment, he absolutely deserved it. Just then, 2 county bailiffs came barreling through the courthouse doors. Perfect timing. They rushed over and restrained Edward, who was still wheezing, trying to sit up. Within seconds, they had him cuffed and reading him his rights. His face was red, his breath shallow, but he still couldn't shut up. "You!" he barked at me, voice cracking. "This isn't over." Then, as one of the deputies helped him to his feet, he lunged. Tried to headbutt the bailiff. Big mistake. Now, it wasn't just assaulting me on the courthouse. Step sit was felony assault on an officer. In our county, every bailiff is a sheriff's deputy, and attacking law enforcement, automatic felony. No room for interpretation. Rebecca stood frozen on the sidewalk, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Neither she nor anyone else had ever seen me raise a hand to anyone, let alone drop her father in full public view. I gave a brief nod to her attorney. He returned it, tight-lipped, then immediately turned to try and talk Edward down before the situation got even worse. I turned to Rebecca. My voice was low and even. "It's over. Don't screw it up any further. Don't make this uglier than it already is. Don't deny me time with the kids." I glanced over at Edward, still snarling through the pain and cuffs. "Your father needs you right now. Call your mom. Help him before he completely implodes." She looked at me, finally looked, really looked. Her eyes weren't angry, just tired, defeated. There was a flicker of something behind them, some acknowledgement of reality. She nodded, almost like she didn't realize she was doing it, then turned and walked over to help the man who had tried to ruin us both. As the adrenaline ebbed, pain began creeping into my right arm. At first, it was just dull and tight, but then I tried to flex my fingers and felt a jolt shoot up my wrist like an electric shock. 2 fingers looked wrong, crooked. By the time the ache morphed into full-blown agony, my lawyer had noticed the color drain from my face. She didn't hesitate, grabbed her keys, helped me into her car, and drove me straight to the nearest ER. An X-ray confirmed it. 2 fractures. My hand hadn't fared so well against Edward's thick skull. The man really was all bone and ego. They gave me a shot of something that dulled the pain just enough, wrapped my arm in a temporary cast, and told me I'd need surgery in the coming weeks to repair the breaks properly. My lawyer stayed the whole time. Saturday in the waiting room, drove me back to my mother's house herself, helped me up the porch steps like I was an old man. No questions asked. The only bad part about the injury was the pain and the reality that it slowed me down. But otherwise, I had a week of rest. A week with my kids. No distractions, no excuses. Every day that week, I saw them. Got to know who they were now, not just who they'd been before everything fell apart. Rebecca still came by every evening to pick them up. She and my mother took those moments inevitably to try to convince me to reconsider, to come home, to fix what's left. I wasn't having it. While she lingered inside, I'd take the kids for an extra walk around the block, or I'd sit in the backyard and listen to them ramble about school and video games and the dumb things their friends said. It wasn't much, but it was everything. After that week, I packed up and returned to the city. Back to work, back to my life. Years passed, slowly at first, then faster. My kids grew. They started spending summers and holidays with me. For a few weeks at a time, my apartment filled with noise and life again. Sometimes Rebecca brought them in person driving across 2 states. But eventually, she decided the long drives and hotel stays weren't worth the effort. Now they flew to me, alone. And she finally understood there would never be a we again. We stayed civil for the kids' sake. We texted about flight times and birthdays and school stuff. I even stopped calling her what I used to call her in my head. I'd forgiven her at least, enough to function. After all the dust had settled, something unexpected happened. A few of my old clients' people who had once looked the other way started reaching out. Letters, emails, messages through mutual contacts. They wanted to come back, wanted me back. Asked if I'd ever thought of reopening the business. I had. Eventually, I convinced Rebecca to sell me her company outright. She was barely holding it together anyway. I didn't buy it to get revenge, I bought it to rebuild. We turned my old firm into a district office under a broader tech umbrella. It started small, local, quiet, but it grew. It worked. And I made sure it stayed clean. No banks, no strings, just steady progress and peace. I was the one responsible for making the new district office thrive. So, every month, I flew into the nearest regional airport, picked up a rental car, and spent a few days servicing clients, smoothing out logistics, and ensuring operations stayed on track. But truth be told, I didn't have to micromanage. I had good local people. Smart, loyal, quietly efficient. They handled 90% of the workload. Rebecca, meanwhile, drifted through a carousel of boyfriends before finally settling down, if you could call it that, with her former attorney. They didn't get married. No vows, no kids. Just two people living together, sharing a house and, presumably, a mattress. Fine by me. Less paperwork. As for Ronald, yeah, he was convicted. But, of course, he didn't exactly rot in prison. His sentence was light weekends only. 6 months. That's it. The kind of sentence you give someone when the system still owes them favors, even after everything. He also had to complete 200 hours of community service. The judge offered him 2 options: clean the ditches around the city, or cook and serve meals at the local shelter. To everyone's shock, he chose the kitchen. And somehow, he got good at it. He actually kept volunteering even after his sentence was up. Turns out, humiliation can be a decent teacher. He's on probation for 5 years now, and while he still walks with his chin up, it's a little less high than it used to be. My mom? She's thriving. She met someone, a quiet, decent man who treats her well. They have their routine, gardening, dinners, watching old television shows, and doting on the grandkids. She's with Lily and Max every day, unless they're with me, of course. She's happier than I've seen her in years. And Josh? Good old Josh. I don't know who tipped off his wife about the affair, but she played the long game like a pro. First, she kicked him out, filed for separation, bled him dry house payments, cars, child support. His bank account went into cardiac arrest. Then came the grand finale. She lured him back with talk of reconciliation, made him believe there was still a chance. That night, she tied him to a chair, don't ask me how, and had sex with 2 of his best friends right in front of him. Then kicked him out again. For good. Now, he's broke, divorced, barely employable. I don't lose sleep over it. As for me, I'm still a work in progress. Trust doesn't come easy, especially not with women, or future in-laws, or anyone who says, "Don't worry, I've got your back." I date. Sometimes casually, sometimes less casually. There's no shortage of women out there, many of them previously married, most with their own baggage and kids. I try to be kind. A good influence when children are involved, but I make no promises. I'm upfront from the beginning. This may not be forever. And every time they think they'll be the one to change me, fix me, heal me. But something always happens. Some red flag, some gut feeling, some tiny voice that says, "Don't let her in." I have a therapist now. We're working on it. Emotionally rewiring a man who was once burned alive, metaphorically then, nearly literally takes time. I bought myself a 3-bedroom house, paid for it in full, in cash. Yeah, I still don't trust banks. Not completely. Even though, weirdly, my credit score has rebounded. Ronaldoff all people fixed his false reports to the credit bureaus, without any request from me. Maybe I should have punched him in the face at the start of our relationship, not the end. But then again, no. That punch came at the perfect time. I'm not unhappy. I wouldn't say I'm fulfilled either, but I'm not bitter. I miss love sometimes. I miss feeling like someone's person. But when I look around at all the wreckage divorces, betrayals, breakups, I don't feel like I'm missing out on much. Life keeps going. So maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I already am. And if you're still here, still listening, subscribe to the channel. Because if you think this story was intense, wait till you hear the next one. And if you're under 18, seriously, don't even think about clicking play. A year after I graduated high school, My dad passed away from a sudden heart attack. Mom told me he had been out back talking about mowing the lawn when she noticed something strange sticking out of the shed door. She went to check, and there he was collapsed, unresponsive. By the time she reached him, it was too late. When the paramedics arrived, they didn't even try to revive him. He was already gone. That moment rewired something in me. My father was solid, dependable, quiet strength, and suddenly, in a blink, he just wasn't. There was a hole where the man had stood my entire life, and no one could fill it. Julia showed up at the funeral, even though we had only been on a handful of dates at the time. I wasn't expecting her, but when I looked up at the cemetery and saw her walking toward me, it felt like someone had tossed me a life vest. She came over without a word, took my hand, and just stood there next to me while tears poured down my face. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to make it about her. She was just there. She even went out of her way to speak kindly to my mom and the few family members who had made the trip. That moment, their gesture of quiet empathy stuck with me. Mom was lucky in a way. The house had been paid off before Dad passed, and he'd left behind a solid life insurance policy. It wouldn't make her rich, but if she was careful, she'd be secure for the rest of her life. Thank God for that. Considering how things would later spiral out of control, that safety net meant more than we knew at the time. There's this old joke about a guy chasing a girl until one day she turns around and catches him. That wasn't our story. Julia wasn't running, she was the one doing the chasing. She asked me out. She made the first move. Hell, she was the one who initiated our sex life. I won't get into the details, it's not that kind of story. But let's just say we clicked. Physically, emotionally, we were synced. Our relationship ramped up fast, and before long, we were seeing only each other. Or at least, I was. As far as I knew, she wasn't seeing anyone else either. Nobody whispered rumors. Nobody hinted otherwise. We were together, fully. We were also sleeping together 2 or 3 times a week. Even with my schedule, we managed to stay connected. Some weeks, I had to travel out to the middle of nowhere farms, wanting to hook up their entire operation with Wi-Fi, from the tractors to the milking stations to their personal computers. These farms were so spread out that installing reliable internet took actual problem-solving real, logistical gymnastics. Sometimes I wasn't home until late, if at all. On those nights, I assumed Julia was just home at her parents' house. I didn't question it. Why would I? We trusted each other, or at least I did. Oh, and about her job? She'd majored in women's studies, which, to put it bluntly, wasn't in high demand in Milltown, so she ended up working for her dad. She started out as a teller, but fast-tracked into a vice president role in the lending department. Pure nepotism, of course. But to her credit, she put her heart into it. Edward wanted her to learn the ropes of banking, and she did. Looking back, it's painfully obvious I was played. Hook, line, and sinker. It was a few weeks before Christmas that year. Julia sat me down one night, looked me in the eye, and told me she was pregnant. Just like that. I was stunned, shocked, and totally unprepared. But I was also raised right. My parents believed in values, real ones. You take responsibility. You do the honorable thing. So I didn't hesitate. I proposed to her that same night. I should have known something was off. They set the wedding date for 7 months after she told me she was pregnant. I didn't question it at first. I was still in a fog, juggling work and wedding planning. But as time went on, something didn't add up. There was no belly, no doctor appointments, no morning sickness, just expensive cakes and guest lists. By the time it finally clicked that she had lied about being pregnant, it was too late. The invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. People were talking. Canceling would have been a scandal. When I confronted Julia about it, she just shrugged. "If I left everything up to you," she said, "we never would have gotten engaged, let alone married. I love you. You love me. It'll work." And the worst part? I bought it. I was so in love with the city princess. I overlooked the manipulation. The sex was incredible. The chemistry was fire. And honestly, I didn't want to lose her. I really just wanted to be with Juliane every way, at any moment. Around her, under her, beside her, I didn't care. So when I finally accepted she had lied about the pregnancy just to lock me down, I let it slide. I justified it in my head. I told myself we were in love, that she just panicked, that she wanted us to work. And so I dove in, head first. I gave that wedding everything I had. It ended up being the biggest celebration Milltown had ever seen. Seriously, people still talk about it. We even held the ceremony on a Sunday afternoon so the entire town could shut down and show up. It was extravagant, organized by some event company out of the city. Drapes, lights, custom seating charts, everything. Like a damn magazine spread. Then came the honeymoon. 2 weeks in Barbados. Julia found a clothing-optional beach on the second day, and I swear, she barely wore a stitch of fabric the rest of the trip. Every night was a new experience. Some nights were tender, full of whispered promises and slow kisses. Others were wild, chaotic, teeth and nails and breathless satisfaction. We explored the island on scooters, got lost more than once, snorkeled through waters so clear it felt like flying. And then bam, back to real life. By the time we returned, I had hired my first employee. The business was growing fast. And over the next few years, I'd expand to 3 full-time techs and an accounting secretary who kept us from becoming a mess of invoices and missed deadlines. About a year into our marriage, Julia told me she was pregnant again. This time, it was real. No faking, no games. We had a daughter, Lily, my little Connie. 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, and a scream that somehow made my chest swell with pride. She was beautiful, so tiny, yet so loud, and absolutely destined to be spoiled rotten. And I didn't mind one bit. 2 years later, Max was born her son, healthy, strong, with the same intense eyes as his mother and a grip that could crush your finger. Now I had the perfect family, a wife, a daughter, a son, a growing business. For a while, I was stupidly, naively happy. I felt like a king in a castle made of warm memories and soft baby cheeks. Then came year 7. That's when it started falling apart. Julia suddenly had a million reasons to work late. Evening meetings, weekend conferences, extra paperwork. I tried to be understanding, really, I did. The banking industry gets busy sometimes, especially during the loan cycle. But this was different. It wasn't loan season. It was a slow year. There were no big developments that could justify the number of nights she was missing dinner, skipping bedtime stories, and not answering texts for hours. To be fair, she always picked up when I called, never ignored a call. But sometimes, especially in the last few months, she'd answer breathless, like she'd just run up a flight of stairs. She always gave some excuse. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But the cracks were growing. Our sex life? Non-existent. She was never home before I went to bed, and most nights, I was so wiped from work and parenting that I passed out right after putting the kids down. I made it a point to be present. I adjusted my schedule to be home when Julia wasn't, so at least the kids had one consistent parent around. Then came one Friday I'll never forget. I came home late, tired, cranky, and ready to crash, and there she was, Julia, home before me, in the kitchen, cooking. She'd made dinner, a real dinner. The smell hit me before I even opened the front door. The kids were bouncing off the walls, chattering non-stop about their day, talking over each other, all trying to get her attention. It was like she'd been gone for years instead of days. We all sat down and had a proper meal together, our first, in what felt like forever. Afterward, we cleaned up the kitchen, packed the dishes into the washer, and settled in on the couch to watch Shrek for what had to be the 100th time. The kids were so glued to her they wouldn't stop climbing into her lap. Eventually, she carried them off to bed, one by one, and told me not to follow. They needed mommy time. When she came back to the living room, the vibe had shifted. She was wearing high heels and a short, silky thing I can only describe as lingerie disguised as sleepwear. Some frilly little number that barely covered anything, a glass of wine in each hand. She sat down, handed me one, and started whispering in my ear about what she wanted to do that night. This wasn't about sweet, tender reconnection. Number. She wanted it rough, fast, no strings, no talk, just bodies. And while part of me was excited and yeah, my body definitely reacted, another part of me hesitated. It had been a while. Too long. I wasn't sure I could keep up. Not in the way she seemed to expect. But I pushed that thought aside and gave her everything I had. And for one night, it felt like things were okay again. Like we might be finding our way back to each other. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I was absolutely sure I'd finished too fast. It had been too long, and the way Julia came at me that night didn't leave much room for pacing. Still, I gave her everything I had, every ounce of energy, every touch, every bit of passion I could muster, and then I passed out cold, slept like the dead. When I woke up the next morning, everything was different. Julia was already dressed, hair done, makeup on. She was standing over me, holding an envelope in one hand and her purse in the other. "Time to wake up, idiot," she snapped. Idiot? Wait, what happened to last night's seductive siren? "The kids are already dressed. We're going to my parents' for the weekend. You've got about 48 hours to get your crap out of my house." I blinked, still half asleep. "What?" "If you get emotional or loud or say anything I don't like," she continued coldly, "there'll be a protective order filed Monday morning. The paperwork's already in the envelope, along with the divorce documents. All signed, all ready to go." I sat up, stunned. "Wait, what? What the hell is going on, Julia? Why are you doing this?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She didn't even look guilty. "Mark's back," she said, referring to her old high school boyfriend, Mark Bishop. "He's working at the bank now. My dad hired him as his right-hand man. We've been reconnecting for a few months, and now it's time to pull the trigger. As soon as this divorce is final, we're getting married." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway for one last grenade. "Oh, by the way, Mark can't have kids, so he wants to adopt Lily. And Max, too. No more of your cutesy nicknames. We're going to raise them properly, and you'll refer to them by their real names from now on." She slammed the door behind her. I sat there, dazed, broken, and completely blindsided. The next 12 hours were a blur. I sat on the floor reading that goddamn envelope over and over again. Each time I went through the papers, it got worse. Julia Sori, Rebecca, as she now legally rebranded herself, wasn't just leaving me. She was gutting me like a fish. She wanted the house. She wanted my business. And sure, technically, I could still run the business. But under the terms she'd drawn up, I'd only earn minimum wage, less than what I paid my staff. She was demanding full custody of the kids, plus child support so high that it exceeded what I'd make under her pay scale. And just to twist the knife a little deeper, she wanted alimony too, even though she made more than double what I did. The cars? Her car was in her name. Mine? Owned by the company, so I could still drive it, as long as I agreed to work for her. We didn't have a lot in savings, but what we did have, she'd already drained most of it from the joint account. I didn't even get half. She left a few bucks in there, just enough not to raise alarms. At some point, I stopped reading. What was the point? It was all so calculated, so heartless, so cold. I had no friends of my own left. Only our friends, the ones who smiled at both of us but were secretly closer to her. I knew they wouldn't help me. So I dug into my mental Rolodex and called up a couple guys I'd known in college, people she never met. They didn't even ask questions, just showed up with a truck and trailer, ready to help. We packed whatever Rebecca hadn't claimed, whatever she wouldn't want. I had nowhere to go, nowhere but work. Thankfully, I'd bought an office building the year before when my business was growing. We needed more space at the time, and I figured it was a smart move. On the second floor, tucked in the back, there was a tiny apartment-tief, you could even call it that. It was dusty, musty, borderline unlivable. But it had 4 walls, a lock, and just enough space to breathe. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Spent all of Sunday scrubbing that place from floor to ceiling. My old camping air mattress became my bed. A couple of those same college buddies dropped off some used furniture, a few pots and pans, and a microwave. That would have to do until I could afford a stove. I didn't have a fridge, so I picked up a cooler and filled it with ice. Tossed a few beers in there too. Cold comfort, literally. Monday morning was coming fast. I woke up on Monday feeling like I'd been run over by a dump truck. My back ached. My neck was locked up. Every muscle in my body screamed. Pro tip: never use an air mattress unless you're camping or homeless. Which, technically, I guess I was. I dragged myself into a freezing shower. There was no hot water upstairs, just a tiny tank feeding the bathroom down in the office. I managed to wash, shave, and make myself look marginally human. Barely. The mirror reflected someone I didn't quite recognize, tired eyes, sallow skin, and a jawline clenched from days of stress. Then came the calls. I dialed every local attorney I could find. Fast, desperate. No one would take my case. Every time I gave them my name, their tone shifted. It was like I'd just confessed to murder. One finally told me flat out, "Mr. Danvers, I'm sorry, but you're radioactive." Edward Lancaster had made the rounds already. Word was out. No lawyer in town would touch me. I didn't have time to find someone out of town, so I did the only thing left. I went to court and represented myself. Big mistake. Judge Ellsworth was presiding. I had a pit in my stomach the moment I walked into the courtroom. He'd been at every one of the Lancaster family's galas, charity dinners, and bank luncheons. I'd seen him at their summer BBQ with a rib in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other. I would bet money his car and his house were both financed through Lancaster Savings and Loan. The judge barely looked at me when he opened the hearing. "Mr. Danvers," he said sharply, "why are you not represented by counsel?" "Your Honor," I said, standing as straight as I could, "I apologize. My wife handed me the divorce paperwork on Saturday morning. I contacted multiple lawyers today before court, but none would take my case. I respectfully ask for a continuance to retain legal representation from outside the county." His face didn't move. "Denied." I blinked. I don't understand." He tapped the folder in front of him. "According to the file, these documents were filed 3 weeks ago. A sheriff's deputy served you at your workplace that same day. You've had more than enough time to find representation and submit the required financial disclosures." "That's not true," I said, louder than I meant to. "I was never served. I never saw any documents until Saturday. You are now in contempt of court," he snapped, slamming his gavel. "This is a blatant attempt to delay these proceedings." I clenched my jaw, swallowed the fury building in my throat, and spoke again quiet, controlled, but clear. "Your Honor, I respectfully ask that my objection be entered into the record. I believe I am being pushed into a settlement entirely biased in favor of my wife-own that is designed to destroy me financially and personally, with no regard for our children's well-being. All of our income documents were filed jointly. She had full access to them. That should negate any claims for unjustified alimony, and she's already stated she intends to remarry. That alone should invalidate spousal support." Ellsworth raised his gavel again. "Be silent." "Sir." "Silence. You have disturbed the order of this court long enough. I find in favor of the plaintiff." He slammed the gavel again. Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out. Just like that, it was done. In under 10 minutes, I was no longer married. My kids were effectively out of reach. My business, what I had built with my own 2 hands, was now hers. I was legally reduced to a low-wage manager in my own company. Rebecca no longer. Julia didn't look thrilled or victorious. For a brief second, her eyes flickered with something, maybe guilt, but it was gone as fast as it appeared. She straightened her shoulders, walked past me, and tossed one last insult over her shoulder. "You better get to work. I'm not paying you to sit around looking like someone just pissed in your Cheerios." Hatred rose in my chest like a flash fire, but I kept still. The bailiff was watching me closely, hand near his hip. His look wasn't friendly. Mark stood up next to her, their attorney in tow. They didn't even look at me as they left the courtroom. I stayed seated, breathing, fists clenched under the table. Because I knew if I lost my temper, if I even twitched the wrong way, they'd throw me in a cell. And that was the plan, wasn't it? Push me far enough to snap, make the accusation stick. A few moments later, one of the bailiff's older guy I vaguely recognized walked over to me, leaned down, and spoke low. They're gone. Others are watching them. But you know how much sway the Lancasters have around here. In this town, in this whole region, you need to find yourself a lawyer in the state capital, far enough away to be safe. He hesitated. We're with you, but if anyone finds out, we'll lose everything. I nodded. Thank you, I whispered. My voice was like gravel. Then I stood up, alone, and walked out of that courtroom a ruined man. As I stepped outside the courthouse, a line of uniformed officers stood like sentinels, watching me leave. Not a word, just cold, silent stares. It felt like walking past a firing squad in Lee. They weren't holding rifles, just judgment. I headed straight to the office. To my surprise, Rebecca and Mark weren't already there. I fully expected them to waltz in, all smug and triumphant, to show off their shiny new ownership papers and claim their territory. But they were nowhere in sight. Their arrogance was going to cost them, and I was already planning to collect. The first thing I did was make sure my team was fully occupied. Nobody asked questions. Everyone was buried in tickets, client issues, hardware orders. Good, I needed cover. Then I grabbed the company checkbook, filled one out for a cash withdrawal, and handed it to Dana, our accounting secretary. Take this to the bank, I said. Tell them I'll be out of town for a few days, working with remote clients. I'll need cash on hand. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. You got it. I couldn't risk going to the bank myself. If Rebecca and Mark had already started twisting arms behind closed doors, there was probably an informal alert to freeze me out. But without a signed court order officially transferring ownership, my signature was still valid on the business account. This was a small town. Cash was still king here. Most businesses didn't like eating the extra percentage fee credit card companies charged, so physical dollars moved fast and often. And I needed that green paper, the kind with dead presidents and no traceable trail. I already knew my debit and credit cards were disabled. I tried to fill my gas tank the night before, and both were declined. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to take my business. They were trying to erase my ability to function. Luckily, I'd acted fast enough. Dana returned with the cash, no issues. I only pulled a couple thousand enough to cover next week's payroll, just in case. I didn't want my employees suffering because of this mess. Then I emptied the petty cash drawer too, leaving behind a note addressed to Rebecca and her stud. Let them figure it out. After that, I played the part of the broken man, head down, shoulders slumped, barely making eye contact. I looked like what they wanted me to be, defeated. But inside, something had lit a fuse. That thirst for vengeance started bubbling. It was slow at first, like a quiet whisper, but it didn't take long before it turned into a roar. They were going to pay. All of them. Rebecca, Mark, and most of all, Edward. He was the puppet master, the one pulling strings from the shadows. No way this was just a spontaneous betrayal between lovers. This had been coordinated, engineered. I hadn't been served because Edward had made sure I wouldn't be. That way, I'd show up to court unprepared, without a lawyer. It all fit too perfectly. He never wanted me as his son-in-law. He just waited for his chance to cut me out. Late that evening, Rebecca and Mark finally slithered into the office. They strutted around like royalty, holding signed court papers like golden tickets. They approached Stacy's front desk admin and handed her the documents that officially transferred ownership to their newly formed corporation. The papers stated I was no longer the owner, just a manager now. A manager. They didn't make a public announcement, but Stacy, she knew, and I knew she'd spread the word eventually. Word always traveled fast in small towns, especially among bored employees with access to the payroll system. For now, though, I kept the show running. When they started snooping around, I told them I had to leave to meet a client and walked out without another word. No confrontation, no eye contact. I wasn't about to hand them the excuse they needed to slap me with a violation of the protective order. According to the order, I couldn't come within 30 meters of either of them. In a town as small as Milltown, that might as well be a restraining order from the entire city. That night, I went to a bar on the edge of town known of my longtime clients. I'd built out his entire point-of-sale system. Everything from cash registers to digital taps, fully integrated to auto-order stock and generate reports. A smart setup. Solid work. He met me at the door before I could even walk in. "Sorry, Alex," he said, eyes darting behind him. "I can't serve you." "What?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He lowered his voice. "Words out. Anyone who serves you, sells to you, even talks to you, risks having their bank loans called in. Nobody can afford that right now. You gotta leave." Then he nodded toward the back door and added in a whisper, "Wait there." I slipped around the side of the building, found the shadowed corner he meant, and waited. A minute later, he appeared with a 12-pack of my favorite beer under his arm. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I wish I could do more. This is all I can give without risking everything." I took the beer, gave him a firm nod, and disappeared into the night grateful, angry, and even more determined. "I can't serve you, Alex." That's what he said. No hesitation, no sugarcoating, just straight to the point, like ripping off a bandage. "The word's out," he continued. "Anyone who serves you, sells you anything, or even talks to you like a human being, their loans get accelerated, and nobody around here can survive that. You gotta leave." He gave me a wink and nodded toward the back door. I got the message. I slipped around the building, pressing myself against the wall. Staying clear of the security cameras, I knew exactly where the blind spots were. Met him at the back door. He was already there, holding a package under his arm. It was a 12-pack of my favorite beer. "I'm sorry, man," he said, eyes heavy with guilt. "Take this as a peace offering. I hope Lancaster gets over himself soon and stops this bullshit." He handed me the beer, then vanished back inside without another word. I hugged the wall again, made my way back toward my apartment, walking the dark side streets like some kind of outlaw in my own town. When I finally got back to the rear entrance of the office building, something stopped me cold. Leaning against the back door was a mattress-used but cleaned a box spring with a metal Hollywood frame stacked neatly beside it. I stood there for a second, stunned. No note, no message, but someone out there knew, and someone still cared. I didn't waste time. Hauled the mattress in, set up the bed, threw the beer on ice, and collapsed onto the softest surface I'd touched in days. I drank 4, maybe 5 bottles, and passed out. It was the best night of sleep I'd had since this whole nightmare started. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. I needed groceries, food, essentials. So I went to Harvey's Market, what used to be Ned's, the place my dad had run for years. The place I practically grew up in. I filled a cart like any normal customer and rolled it up to the checkout lane. That's when it all went sideways. The cashier looked up at me, froze, then walked into the back room. Seconds later, Ned himself came out. His face was tight, pale. His eyes didn't meet mine. "Alex, I'm sorry. You need to go." "What?" I asked. "I just need groceries. He cut me off. "I like you and your family. You know that. But I can't go against Edward Lancaster. If he finds out I sold to you, even looked at you the wrong way, he'll shut me down in a week. Please, just go." He raised his voice near the end, loud enough for the cameras and witnesses nearby. He even gave me a shove through the doors to really sell it. But as he did, he muttered quietly, "Tell your mom I said hi." That evening, I found all the groceries I'd picked out sitting inside a heavy wooden box next to my car, padlocked shut. The key was on the front tire, tucked behind the rim. I popped the lock, lifted the lid, and looked inside. Everything I'd needed, bagged, organized, even labeled. I tried to move the box, but it was stupidly heavy. When I flipped it over, I found steel plates bolted to the underside. Whoever left it didn't want anyone making off with it. It wouldn't stop a thief with tools, but it would sure slow down a nosy neighbor or some pawn shop bottom feeder. My invisible allies were still out there. That weekend, I left town for a few days to work with some out-of-county clients, people who didn't care about the drama or Edward's wrath, people who just needed their networks to stay online. While I was out there, something began to take root inside me. A thought, a seed. I realized I couldn't get what I needed here. Not in Milltown. The town had been poisoned. So I started picking things up, little by little. Every time I went out of town, I bought a couple extra supplies. Small cans of fuel, diesel, gasoline. No questions asked when you pay cash at a rural service station. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Mark were still making my life hell. She started blowing up my phone calling several times a day. I changed my number, but she kept finding new ways to reach me. One day, a cop showed up at my door, said someone reported I was violating the protective order. I never even answered the phone, I told him. How is that a violation? He shrugged. Just stop causing trouble. And then he left. It got so ridiculous, I couldn't even pump gas into my company car. I had to ask one of my employees to fill it for me because the local stations had flagged me too. But the real breaking point, the moment the switch flipped, was when they came after my mom. Lancaster's bank started calling her daily, trying to push a reverse mortgage. Then the county claimed they hadn't received her property tax payment. Total crap, she'd sent it in early, like she always did. When I finally reached the tax office, the guy on the other end whispered into the phone, "Ronald Lancaster's pushing this. He wants your mother's name off that property." That was it. That was the moment I stopped hoping this would all blow over. That bastard went after my mother? I didn't care what it took anymore. He was going to pay, and I only needed one more week to prepare. I needed to be ready. It had to happen in the dead of night, when the town was quiet and the only cops on duty were either asleep in their cruisers or staring into empty coffee cups. That's when the gaps appeared. That's when I could move. During the day, I kept my head down, played the part, but every afternoon, I'd sneak out of town, drive to another city, park somewhere quiet, and nap in my car, conserving energy, mentally rehearsing, fine-tuning. One afternoon, I bought a battered old pickup truck from a farmer about 40 miles out. The thing rattled like a tin can full of bolts, but the plates were valid for a few more months. I didn't register it in my Nomino, need to leave a trail. The farmer didn't ask questions. Cash does that. We drove it to an abandoned house about a mile outside Milltown. The place had been empty for years perfect. He helped me hide the truck behind a collapsed fence and overgrown brush. It would stay there until I needed it. Then the night came. Late, after every shop had shut down and the streets went still, I walked the length of Main Street first, just to make sure all the buildings were dark. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, at least not anyone innocent. But if certain people got caught in the chaos, I wouldn't have lost sleep. This was it. Time to act. First, I returned to the office. My old company. My old pride and joy. I sat down at my workstation, the one they still made me use, and remotely accessed the integrated fire alarm systems for several key businesses. They all used my system, my code. I designed the networks, which meant I knew exactly how to disable them without triggering fail-safes. I didn't touch the hospital, or the bank. Federal law was a line I wasn't willing to cross. But the other places? Fair game. Once everything was silent, I grabbed the materials I'd stockpiled. In the truck's bed were several glass bottles prepped with a mix of diesel and gasoline. I soaked rags in the same fuel and twisted them into tight wicks. My first target was a convenience store on the edge of town. I found a loose brick nearby and chucked it through the door's glass. The smash echoed down the street. I lit the wick, held it for 2 heartbeats, then hurled the bottle inside. It shattered against the edge of a shelf, igniting instantly. Flames licked upward, swallowing plastic wrap and bags of chips. No time to admire the destruction. I drove to the other end of town and hit a second store. Same routine. When I heard the sirens wail in the distance, Milltown's volunteer fire department scrambling to respond, I couldn't help but smile. Edward Lancaster was the fire chief. He also chaired the board of trustees for the department. He'd spent years refusing to fund upgrades, delaying modern equipment, cutting corners to save taxpayer dollars. Tonight would show him what that kind of negligence bought. I moved on to the farm supply store. The manager had always treated me like trash long before the drama with Rebecca. This one felt personal. I used 3 cocktails here, spaced out across the building. One in the warehouse, one near the garden center, one right by the loading dock. By the time the sprinklers kicked in, it was too late. They ran, sure, but the flames were already out of control. Without proper water pressure or backup supply, the sprinklers couldn't do more than spit steam into the inferno. The center of town was glowing orange. Smoke billowed into the sky. I wasn't done. I called my old landline, the house I'd once shared with Rebecca and the kids. She answered, her voice tense. Hello? Using a voice modulator I bought at a toy store, some cheap Darth Vader knockoff, I spoke clearly. There is an arsonist in the neighborhood. Take your children to Margaret Danvers' house immediately. Do not return until it is safe. Then I hung up. I sat parked on a nearby street, engine off, lights out, watching. Almost exactly 1 hour later, I saw Rebecca hustle out of the house with the kids in tow. They got into her SUV and peeled off. I knew exactly where she was headed. To her parents' mansion. Just like I wanted. But she had no idea what was waiting for her there. And I wasn't in any rush.